What's up, guys? Today we're going to be finally going over the Ticuu's Divination and be going over why you should probably be using this almost all the time in PvE. It is that good. So we'll be breaking down exactly what this weapon does with the Callus in this video. Then we'll also be comparing it to the Trinity Ghoul and seeing which bow is the best overall. And before we get into the video, make sure you use my code AIR on GFuel for 30% off right now. Go ahead and click the link in the comments description. It will take you to the store and automatically apply my discount code. And if you guys keep popping off, one day we might have a Greg Shaker or even a flavor of our own. Anyways, let's go and begin with the video looking at this exotic bow. Looking at exotic perk Sacred Flame. If firing this weapon fires multiple tracking projectiles, targets marked by these projectiles explode upon death or when struck by another Sacred Flame explosion. Then the secondary perk Causality Arrows. Arrows fired while aiming down sights cause Sacred Flames to instantly detonate. Precision hits with perfectly drawn arrows increase the power of this detonation. So there's a lot going on there, but it pretty much boils down to if you hip fire the weapon, you shoot 3 tracking arrows that will prime a target. Then if you hit that primed target with the ADS arrow, they will then explode. Then if you do a perfectly drawn arrow, which is when you release it right after it's fully shrunk back, and it will double the damage of the explosion, which is obviously very good. So instantly this bow has a very fun gameplay loop. You pretty much prime enemies by hip firing, and you don't have to really fully draw it back. You just kind of tap it and it will hit 3 enemies at a time. And you can prime as many as you want, then you ADS and hit one of them, which will then pretty much cause them all to chain explode. So it's almost like Sunshot in bow form, where not only do enemies explode, they pretty much chain explode also. So it's extremely strong and very good. Then if we add in the Callus on top of this, the bow becomes extremely good. So what the Callus does is perfectly drawn arrows that detonate Sacred Flames increase arrow damage. Striking targets unaffected by Sacred Flames instead refreshes Causality Arrows duration. So pretty much how this works is every single time you get one of those perfectly drawn arrows that would cause the 2x explosion. Now on top of that, you will also get stacks of Causality Arrows all the way up to ×6, and this will buff the actual arrow damage itself, not the explosion damage. So just how we could increase the explosion damage by 2x, with ×6 the arrow damage itself will be 2x. So now we have 2x arrow damage and 2x explosion damage. And once you get into the higher stacks of this buff, I mean, you're one-hitting pretty much every red bar in the game guaranteed. You're one-hitting majors. You're doing a decent amount of damage to bosses. I mean, this bow is really good. And these stacks of the Causality Arrows will last for 5 seconds, almost like Rampage with Rampage spec. Then the second part is when you hit an enemy that is not affected by Sacred Flames, which means they're not primed to be exploded yet. It should reset the timer of this buff and extend it and allow you to chain it more and more often. The keyword there is should, because sometimes it feels like it doesn't work, but sometimes it does work. But as long as you're getting perfectly drawn arrow hits every 5 seconds, it'll refresh the stack of the buff anyways. But overall, with this Callus and just the journal perks on the bow, I mean, this thing shreds through anything. Unlike most really good Actor weapons, they usually slow down when you get to majors and things like that and kind of stop working. But this thing just keeps going, keeps chugging. Then if we compare that to the Trinity Ghoul, which is one of the best Actor weapons in the history of Destiny, pretty much how Trinity Ghoul works is once you get an arc final blow, every single arrow will then do an arc like chain lightning effect whenever it lands or hits anything. And as long as that gets a kill, it'll prime the next arrow with lightning rod again. And for trash mobs, this thing is insane. You just tap the fire button and you pretty much just clear entire rooms without even having to think. As long as you're getting 1 kill per arrow, you'll have lightning rod on every single shot. So there's absolutely no denying that this thing is absolutely insane at clearing out trash mobs, and it is pretty much the best thing to ever do it. But the thing about it is the Ticuu's Divination is also extremely good at clearing out trash mobs. Maybe not quite as good as Trinity Ghoul, but Ticuu's is also extremely good at higher health enemies, harder activities, majors, bosses, you name it. So where Trinity Ghoul is extremely good at one thing, Ticuu's is just good all around. Then on top of that, since it's solar explosions, almost like Sunshot, you can pair that with Wrath of Rasputin, which will then create Warmind cells, pair that with Rage of the Warmind and Global Reach for that holy trinity of the 3 best Warmind cell perks. Once you kill like 5 enemies with the solar explosions, you will then get a Warmind cell. Then when you detonate that Warmind cell, it'll clear out the rest of the room, and there's a good chance you'll have another Warmind cell created from that explosion. If not, on your next kill you'll have one. So now that this bow also has Warmind cells on top of how good it is already, I think it's pretty safe to say it is on par with Trinity Ghoul for clearing out trash mobs. But now it's also extremely good for majors, bosses, everything, you name it. This bow just keeps going. It is so good. I mean, I almost 2-hit this Lost Sector boss with only ×4 of the causality arrows. If I ×6 on both arrows, he's definitely getting 2-hit. I mean, that's a Lost Sector boss being 2-hit by a primary bow. I mean, this thing is crazy. Then finish out the build, I have Taking Charge. Then with those stacks of Charge Light, you can do whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. I'm using Protective Light just to stay alive. But like I said, you can use really whatever. Another thing you could try is the artifact perk, where when you get rapid precision hits at range, it will debuff the enemy by 20% for roughly 12 seconds. You could try that with this bow. I haven't tried it myself. I'm not quite sure if the way you fire hip fires then ADS will be quick enough to proc that, but you can definitely try it. Now, I usually run the Heritage with Recombination, which is going to be very good for enemies that get close. Then I also use a Code Duello or pretty much whatever legendary rocket of choice, or even Falling Guillotine in my heavy slot. All those options will be pretty good for boss damage depending on what you need. And here is my subclass build I'm using. You don't even need to be playing Stasis or even Warlock. This will work on any character, but that's just kind of what I was using. So overall, I shouldn't be surprised when I say I'm definitely a huge fan of this bow. I just love this thing. I think it's probably my second favorite build of the season. I still use Salvo quite a bit, but for harder content, this build right here is insane. The main difference between this thing compared to a lot of really good ad clear builds is it feels like most of the time those other builds kind of slow down once you get to harder content, but this thing just keeps going. It can still one-hit most red bars even like while under level. Then once you get a few of those explosion kills, you'll create more mind cells. Compared to using something like Icalus SMG and a GM Nightfall, I mean, good luck killing 5 enemies in a decent amount of time to create a Warmind cell. But with this thing, you're going to be easily getting kills left and right and still be making those Warmind cells, clearing out the entire room for your fire team, so on and so on. Also, I'm a huge fan of exotics that kind of have like a learning curve and a skill gap to it, and aren't just like, hey, shoot this thing and that's kind of like the end of the story. I love the gameplay loop of this bow where you have to prime targets, then choose how to detonate them, and try to string together those causality arrows and things like that. I just love when you have to put a little bit of thought into optimizing the way you use your actual weapon. And how I was mentioning earlier that this weapon becomes better and better with harder content. Another thing about this weapon is usually with ad clear builds, whenever you have fire team members are doing similar builds or something like that, you know, it pretty much cancels each other out and it doesn't really work. You kind of need to be like the solo guy clearing out ads to keep the buff or whatever you're doing going. But with this build, whenever you prime targets, it doesn't matter how they die, they will always explode. So if you have multiple people on your team using this bow, or if you're just the only one on your team using it, the more people you prime, doesn't matter how they die, they'll still explode. So once again, it almost becomes better with more people using it and more people on your fire team clearing out the enemies. As long as you're just priming things left and right, whenever they die, they'll explode, so on and so on. So not only is this bow extremely good for ad clear in any tier of activity, it also doesn't really become worse if other people are also killing stuff. Whereas with a lot of builds, if people start stealing your kills, you'll lose out on, you know, stack of charge of light, you'll lose out on your buff, whatever it is, it'll kind of fall apart. And as I mentioned earlier, I do think Trinity Ghoul is a little bit better for just trash mobs and we're not trying to pay attention like at all. But this bow, especially with Warmind cells, I think is equally as good as Trinity Ghoul at low tier content, but just way better in everything above that. And the final thing that will make this bow extremely good in the future is as the Seraph and Icalus weapons get sunset and they can no longer make Warmind cells and relevant content, if they don't replace those weapons over time, and the only way to create Warmind cells is through Wrath of Rasputin, I think things like Sunshot in this bow or even Xenophage will be extremely popular. And out of those three, I'm definitely picking this one as of right now. I just think it is the best of all three. And especially given the fact that legendary rocket launchers are extremely strong right now, you don't really need exotic heavy. You can kind of afford to use exotic bow like this. So yeah, this bow is extremely good on its own. It becomes god tier with the right Warmind cell build. And in the future, as things get sunset, I think it'll just get better and better. Anyways, the rest of the video will just be some strike gameplay to show off this build and how good it is. Anyways, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.